This happened about 20 years ago. I was about 9 years old at the time, but my parents have also told me their side of this story on a bunch of different occasions. Because of this, I have some details from them that should help paint a complete picture of the events. My parents are both biologists. They met at work, and from there it's a classic history. The place where they worked at the time was a government building dedicated to biology research used in government projects turned towards the public, meaning they were the ones studying the environment and making environmental protection laws around those studies. This, being a massive old government building, always had a security guard present, day and night. During the day, those security guards would mostly just stay at reception and greet people entering the building. At night, though, they would go do their rounds and make sure there were no intruders. All the science equipment and computers kept in the building could be a prime target. One of these guards is the bad guy of this story. Initially, he seemed like the nicest person actually. He was especially nice to me, and frankly, all the memories I have of him before this event were all genuinely pleasant. He would greet me and talk to me in the sweetest way every time my parents brought me into work. He would make me paper planes, which he was surprisingly good at, and play with me throwing them around. He would stay with me at reception on the days my parents had to work late into the night. Obviously, for me, that would get really boring really fast. He'd always keep me company and help entertain me. Mostly we would talk. Sometimes we'd watch TV together. All seemed innocent enough. Nice enough for my parents to trust him with me at least, which was probably their biggest mistake. One night, my parents had to work even later than usual. I think it was around 10 p.m. or so, and they were still deep into their work. This guy, who was on the night shift, decided to take me around the building with him to do his rounds. We started on the top floor, checking all the rooms and the exterior part of the roof. Every room was so dark that I'd always stay a little behind and wait for him to turn on the lights. We stepped down to the second floor, where my parents' office and labs were. We checked the opposite side of the building, going into labs with massive extractors, microscopes, every kind of science equipment you might think of. We walked down the stairs to the first floor, where the administration rooms were. I remember seeing some maps on the walls and embalmed fish everywhere serving as decorations. First floor was all clear as well, so now it was time to check out the 2 basement levels. I thought it would have made sense to check out the right side first, as the left side had a flight of stairs at the end leading up to where my parents were. For some reason, he decided we'd go check that side first though. We checked all the rooms together, but I noticed his pace was accelerating, and he was starting to look and sound happier and happier, quite excited even. Once again, we checked all the rooms, all the corners from one end to the other, turning on the lights ahead of us and turning them off behind us as we left. When we got to the last area, he turned all the lights on and we went inside. There were 3 separate offices in here. On the first one, he hurried towards the printer, opened it up, took out 2 pieces of paper, and made 2 quick paper planes. That's when everything changed. He picked up one of those planes, went outside the office, and threw it towards the end of the room. He then told me we were going to play a game. The plane he'd just thrown was mine, and that we could throw them around in here with nobody bothering us, back and forth. I ran to the other side of the room to retrieve my plane, excited to play a game with him, when suddenly all the lights switched off. When I turned around to check what just happened, I saw him sprinting out of the lab, turning all the lights off on the way, and locking the door behind him. I ran to the door, punched it and kicked it while screaming for him to open. Panic began to take over me because of how scared I was of being in the dark at the time. Through the glass on the door, I could see him scurrying away down the corridors, turning every light off as he went, and then disappearing into the darkness. I'm pretty sure that everything I felt and every creepy monster I saw in there while waiting was part of my imagination because of how scared I was. I balled up against a corner and could see things moving around me in the dark. I could only cry, lost without knowing what was happening and why he'd just suddenly do this. My parents finished their work eventually. When they did, they packed up their things and made their way to the lobby to pick me up and go home. Only when they got there, I was nowhere to be found. The security guard was back at reception, acting like he'd never seen me. They panicked, of course, must have shouted 100 different cuss words at the guy. I'm not sure how my dad didn't just attack him right then and there. When they asked the guy where the hell I was and what he'd done to me, he simply said he'd gone to do the rounds with me, and I must have gotten lost along the way somewhere. This was a building that would take you hours to check from top to bottom, even if you were rushing, so maybe they got lost somewhere was not exactly helpful. They searched the building for hours without finding me. It was only when I saw a light at the far end of one of the corridors leading to the area I was in that I got the courage to stand up, rush towards the door, and start hitting it as hard as I could. They finally found me there and made the guard unlock the door to let me out. I don't really remember sleeping that night, and if I did, it must have been out of exhaustion. I made my mom stay in the bedroom with me the entire night. Of course, my parents soon made a complaint against the guard. When they did, and the guy started being investigated, he was promptly fired and arrested. Not because of locking me away where he probably hoped no one would find me, but because he'd been partnering up with other criminals to steal computers and equipment from the building to sell in some shady market. He also sold the information in the hard drives to make money off it. By then, he had stolen a lot of equipment without anyone realizing. Who knows what his plans were for me that night. I'm not exactly convinced that locking a crying child in the middle of the darkness hidden away in some room in the depths of the building is exactly the most normal behavior. When I was 17 years old, my bedroom had this window looking out at my backyard. The backyard was fenced in, but on the other side of the fence were some woods and a retention pond. I'd never been scared of this and always kept the blinds open so that when the sun rose in the morning, the natural light would help me wake up on my own. One night, I was up late on my phone while my dog was laying on the bed right next to me. At around 2 a.m., my dog jumped up and suddenly started barking at the window. At first, I thought he was just barking at his reflection and told him to stop. Then, though, I realized he was looking to the left side of the window, and I could clearly see his reflection was on the right. I couldn't see outside the window because I had left the lamp on my nightstand on. All I could see through the window was a reflection of my own bedroom. Not wanting to alert whatever might be out there that I was scared, I faked a yawn, set my phone aside, and turned off the lamp. I then laid down facing the window. I swear, I saw a set of human eyes looking back at me from the side of the window my dog had been aggravated at. I drank a lot of water that night, so coincidentally I had an empty bottle on my nightstand. I grabbed it and pretended like I'd just realized it was empty. I turned on the lamp and acted like I was going to get some water. I rushed to my parents' room, and my dad told me not to worry. We had these motion-activated floodlights, you see, and they hadn't turned on, so there was no way anyone was out there. I went back to my room and told myself I was surely just seeing things. I closed the blinds, turned off the lamp, and went to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I went to take my dog out and do his business when I decided to check the pine straw bedding underneath my window. It was visibly disturbed. I did my best to ignore that and remember what my dad had said about the floodlights. That did work pretty well until my dad tested the floodlights later that day and found that the bulbs had been burst out. To this day, I keep my blinds closed and my lamp off when I'm asleep. I don't want to risk anyone being able to see me, and if anything is somehow peeking through my window, I want to know if it's there. I'm sure there was someone looking into my window that night. I just don't know who they were. This might not be the scariest thing you've ever heard, but it's the first time I've had something like this happen to me, and it shook me up super bad. To set the scene, I'm 18 years old and live with my family very close to my old high school. Sometimes my youngest sister, who's 13, and I go to walk around the track while we listen to some music. Today after dinner, we decided it was a good time to go. It was still light out, and there were 2 other people on the track with us. The high school layout was kind of weird. The track was at the very bottom of this steep hill, with a wheelchair ramp and stairs going far, far down the hill to the actual football/baseball fields. Then there was a long path towards the cage basketball courts, closer to the actual school building. My sister and I were just walking around listening to our tunes, and it was starting to get a little bit dark. One of the men running had to leave, and the other one just walked out of the track with his dog. That's when this odd guy showed up. He had super long hair covering his entire face and was wearing all black. He had this giant black backpack slung around to the front of his chest as well. I'll be honest and say I got weird vibes immediately when he entered, but I had nothing to really base this off of. I assumed I was just being paranoid of a person appearing at dark as per usual. He entered towards the track area gate, but instead of going onto the track, he sprinted down the steep hill and hid away. I literally pointed out how weird this was to my sister as soon as it happened. What business did he have booking it down the hill towards the bleachers and hiding like that? But whatever. I kind of assumed he must have gone somewhere else, because we kept walking after that and didn't see him at all. As soon as the guy with his dog fully left though, the man who'd hidden on the hill entered the track where we were and started speed walking towards us. Now, to be fair, he could have been doing what we were and just listening to some music, getting an exercise. But he already freaked me out, and we had been walking for long enough that I decided we should go home right now. It was now getting really dark too. As soon as he got on the track and started making a beeline towards us, I suggested we leave. Instead of heading towards the main gate we'd come from, closer to our house but right where he was, I made us go through the gate leading towards the stairs down the hill, so we would be going the long way around. Here is when I knew something was wrong. The man who had gotten onto the track less than 40 seconds ago immediately turned our way and started following us towards the gate we were leaving through. I was a little freaked out, so I started jogging. My sister thought I was just playing around, so she followed suit. I jogged down the stairs towards the football field and continued down the long path toward the only unlocked exit, which was all the way at the basketball courts. I guess my sister caught on soon though, because she turned her head, only to see the same man now sprinting down the stairs towards us. By the time we reached the end of the path, he'd already made it down the hill, and was clearly gaining on us. I was like, what the fuck? I immediately texted my dad because we lived so close, but I think he didn't see it because he was watching a movie or something. The man continued to sprint after us, speeding up the further along we got. It felt like a horror movie, to be honest. We eventually made it through the unlocked gate. My sister shoved it as hard as she could behind us, and we started speeding up the hill, the long way back to our home. Luckily, there was a woman walking her dog that way, so we kind of stuck near her because there weren't any streetlights on yet. We got back to the top of the hill, and the man was nowhere to be seen. I was so shaken already, though, that I made us jog back home so we could tell our dad what happened. I'm not sure why this man watched us from the hill or followed us through the ridiculous long mazeway we took to get home, but I hope we never encounter each other again. I thru-hiked the Appalachian Trail, no bow, in 2023, northbound for those of you who aren't familiar. It was an unbelievable experience I'll never forget. I met so many great people and had so many unforgettable experiences as well, including the one you're about to hear. I was in Vermont in an area called the Glastonbury Wilderness, which is located near the infamous Bennington Triangle. I was hiking alone at the time, as the rest of my family, my trail family, and I were all within maybe a mile of each other. We were scheduled to meet up at a hostel later that night. I was hiking through the wilderness area when I noticed that the forest and mountain around me had gone completely silent. No birds, no sound of critters. It even felt like the wind stopped as well. Prior to the hike, I've worked in forestry, and I've done a fair amount of backpacking before. Because of this, I knew this sort of behavior was indicative of a large predator being nearby. It's happened to me before, so I wasn't immediately terrified. I took note of it and continued to hike onward. Maybe about 10 seconds later though, just off to my right side and up the mountain face, something big was thundering around the woods. The footfalls were heavy enough where they seemed to echo out. I stopped hiking at this point and definitely felt the hairs on my neck and arms stand up. I was looking through the trees, scanning the foliage to see if I could spot anything. When I spotted something big and black or dark brown moving around in the trees, that thing was making these footsteps. It stopped moving for maybe another 10 seconds, then silence. Suddenly, something at least 7 to 8 feet tall stood up on 2 feet and looked right at me from behind some rocks. My body had never felt such a strong fight or flight feeling before, and I definitely chose flight. I'll never forget how intense that primal response was. I jumped up and hauled ass north on the trail, making sure to make lots of noise, as you're supposed to do when bears are near you. This thing, which at this point I was assuming was a bear, followed me for another 10 seconds before taking off back into the woods. I caught up with one of my hiker friends, and she said I was pale and spooked looking. I told her I saw what was fairly certainly a bear maybe a quarter mile back. After calming down a bit, we laughed it off as my first bear encounter. Now, if that was the end of the story, I would have totally believed it to be an ordinary occurrence in the wild, and while it was scary in the moment, I wouldn't have thought too much about it. Hikers see bears on the trail all the time. It's definitely a common occurrence. It's what I heard a few days later that scared me. A few days after that, a few hikers caught a ride from a shuttle driver to town for a resupply and back. We were chatting, and he asked us if we had any crazy stories to share. I didn't mention my encounter, because I was still thinking it was just a bear. After some more conversation and stories from the other hikers though, we asked him if he had any crazy ones. He told us that not even days ago, the same day I'd had my encounter to be exact, he got a call to pick up a hiker from a road crossing just outside the area where I was. She told him she was quitting the trail that day and asked to be taken to the airport. When he asked why, all she said was that she'd heard a baby crying in the woods, and when she looked around to investigate, she saw something running around in the woods and watching her. Apparently, it spooked her so bad, she left the trail immediately. I told the driver my story after that. The driver then told us he'd hiked and hunted in this area for years, and said bears don't get that tall, and moose don't stand up on 2 feet. The only thing he's ever heard about that is that some people will dress as Bigfoot and try to prey on hikers by themselves. Apparently, that's just a rumor though. I'm not sure what would be scarier, to be honest, actually seeing Bigfoot in the wilderness of New England, or seeing a psycho who dresses up as Bigfoot and was stalking me in the wilderness of New England. Either way, it's one of my more memorable trail stories. This happened at the end of summer in 2019. I, female, needed a distraction from my boring university revisions, and as lots of bored single people do, I hopped on Tinder. Nothing too serious really. I was too busy to meet guys anyway. I simply liked talking to people. One day I matched with a guy who we'll name Ted, who was in the same university as I was. He looked very handsome in his pictures. After talking for a few days on the app, and after I had wrongfully decided he was not a criminal, oh the irony, I gave him my number. Again, we talked for a while, then he asked to call me. Nothing too exciting, just the usual getting to know each other. We talked on the phone for a couple of weeks. He called me at random hours of the day and almost every night. I didn't really think that much of it though. During our phone calls, he mostly talked about himself. I didn't really mind though because I didn't like talking much about me. It takes time before I trust anyone, and again, I was bored and a bit lonely. I'd been single for a while, so getting the attention felt quite nice. After a few weeks, Ted asked if I wanted to meet. I said yes because I'd finished with my exams. We met at the city center. When I saw him, I was kind of shocked. He looked nothing like the handsome guy in his pictures. It was definitely still him, you could tell, but good angles and Photoshop truly do make miracles is all I can say. I was a bit taken aback, but I'm not one to judge by looks anyway, so I went on with the date. Thinking back now though, there were some obvious red flags I missed. He kept asking weird questions like, "Are you shy? Why won't you stare into my eyes?" Well, buddy, non-stop eye contact is really weird. I do need to take my eyes off you to pick up my beer from the table or light up a cigarette sometimes. The night went on and we'd had quite a few drinks. Usually, I would never ask someone I just met to come home with me, but I was wearing beer mojito vodka goggles that made my brain blind. We left and spent the night together. In the morning, I drove him to the train station and went back home to have a nap. At the end of the day, he called me and asked if we could meet again the next night. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to see him again though. I knew the only reason I'd brought him home was alcohol in the first place. We didn't really click at all on the date. The idea of rejecting him made me feel guilty though, so I agreed anyway. The day after that, he came to my place again, and there things started to get weird. I started to feel extremely nervous. Something was feeling really off. Thinking back, I think it was probably my guts telling me to get away from this guy. I decided to make things clear. I told him I was not looking for a serious relationship at all, at least not with him. I apologized and decided to bring him home. When we got in the car, he was quite angry. He didn't talk to me and I was embarrassed, so I didn't talk either. We arrived, he got out and slammed the car door quite hard. I knew I'd made quite a few mistakes here. I shouldn't have accepted another date with him knowing I was not into him, and I should have told him sooner I didn't want a relationship. I sincerely did not mean to act so badly. That's why I tried to be honest with him as I could. The next day, I called him and apologized again. He said it was fine and we hung up. I thought that would be it, but oh boy was that not. A few days later, it was time to get back to uni. That morning, I woke up to this gigantic message from him, telling me that the reaction I had a few nights before really threw him off, and he was looking for stability. As soon as I opened the text, he called me. It was 7 in the morning and I'd just woken up, so I couldn't really understand what he was saying. I simply told him again I didn't want to go any further with our relationship. He hung up, and for the next few weeks, things got even weirder. He started following me everywhere on campus, very obviously hiding behind walls to hear my conversations, texting me all hours of the day, even if I was not replying. Calling me 20 times a day even. I thought he was creepy, but that maybe he was hurt and was just coping. Ted was always with a guy we'll call Elliot as well. When I was at the library, they were always sitting together near to where I was. Ted was always watching me as I would study. When I went out for a break, he would follow me. It came to the point where my friends were texting me to warn me he was right behind me. I tried avoiding him, but it was useless. I told him many times I did not want any more contact with him, and he was making me uncomfortable, but nothing worked. He just kept going on, and I was going crazy. 2 weeks later, I was at a party where I met my now boyfriend. I fell in love very quickly. He's the most caring, loving man I've ever met. It's all lovey-dovey, yes, try not to puke on your keyboard. Anyway, in that moment, I knew I needed to put my foot down and stop being so acceptant of Ted's behavior. I explained to him one last time to stop contacting me and finally blocked him. I truly thought it would be over now. He continued to follow me everywhere on campus though, except he was not with Elliot anymore. One day I was studying in the library. Ted was a few tables away from me, of course, when suddenly someone sat at the table in front of mine. It was Elliot. I looked at Ted and he was glaring at Elliot with the most murderous gaze ever. I thought it was weird. I had never spoken to Elliot before, and he never came near me at all either. I was creeped out. I thought maybe Ted had sent him to talk to me or something. But instead, Elliot just ignored me and I kept on studying. When I went outside for a cigarette, he also blocked Ted from following me. I was a bit surprised, but I didn't think much of it. A few moments later, Ted went outside. Elliot turned his head and watched him till he was out of sight. Then he turned to me and spoke in a hurry. "Hey, I really need to talk to you, okay? I think you're in some danger. I'm sorry, I know it's weird because we don't really know each other, but I'm really worried for you." I was stunned. I didn't know what to say. "We don't have a lot of time before he comes back. When you went out, he came yelling at me because I sat in front of you. When he leaves, we need to talk some more, okay?" I said yes, and I was shaking. At around 6 p.m., Ted finally left after watching me the whole day. We waited another hour to make sure he was gone. We didn't want him to know we were in contact with each other. At 7 p.m., we sat down in the cafeteria, and Elliot told me things that made me shiver. He explained that Ted had had really horrible discourses about women and how he would love to control them. He also explained that a few weeks prior, he'd started to have suspicions about Ted's behavior regarding university classes. He followed random classes every week, sometimes even showed up at Elliot's classes, although he did not follow them, and he didn't seem to have access to the university online platforms either. Elliot did a bit more digging and realized that his friend did not have a university email address, which every member of the university was supposed to have. Elliot went to the administration, and they confirmed what he'd suspected. Ted was not a student. He never was. After that, Elliot completely cut off contact with him. Since then, Ted was harassing him, calling and texting him all the time, following him everywhere. Elliot was shaking as he was telling me this story. I was shaken up as well. But what was coming would reveal itself to be even worse. Elliot explained he absolutely needed to warn me because Ted had started saying some really terrifying things about me specifically. I wanted to cry. Ted was talking about me all the time. Shortly before Elliot cut contact, it got to the point where Ted was making very detailed plans about how he was going to rear me. That he knew where I lived, that he could come whenever he wanted and get me by surprise. He even knew where I parked my car on campus, and he wanted to wait for me in the dark. He always said it with this joking tone, but Elliot got real freaked out. I had tears in my eyes. I knew Ted was a creep, but I could have never imagined it was that bad. At this point, we were near the end of the semester, but we still had a few weeks left. Elliot and I decided to take action because we didn't want to be terrified every time we were on campus. First things first, we contacted university security. Things were taken extremely seriously. One morning when I arrived, the walls were completely covered with posters with a campus emergency number. Elliot and I began constant contact with the chief of security, who was very concerned for our safety. They managed to catch Ted at the library and asked him not to come again. We also went to the police. I don't know the right term for it, but we didn't file a complaint exactly. The police added a note to his record so that if anything happened to us, the police would know what we were worried about in the first place. The officers seemed worried as well. I asked him why. He told me he wasn't allowed to say anything specific, but if I ever saw Ted outside of campus, I needed to call the police without hesitation. How reassuring was that? A few days later, I got a voicemail from Elliot. Told me that he knows things he was not supposed to know. Apparently Ted is mentally sick. He's regularly arrested and locked in mental hospitals. Drug addict, alcoholic, has violent tendencies, was already accused of attempted rape. He lived off invalidity insurance, which explains why he had so much time on his hands to come to university. I would have never guessed that when I met him initially. Later, I contacted one of my acquaintances who works closely with the police. They weren't supposed to, but they confirmed everything. Sent chills down my spine. After that, things calmed down. Ted was still somehow managing to skulk about campus, but he kept a low profile instead. He stopped following us. It was finally the end of the semester. I went away for a few weeks and never set a foot on the campus. I felt a bit relieved. When spring semester started though, Ted was somehow still there, not following any longer but always watching closely. I was so freaked out. Then COVID hit, fortunately. Since then, all courses are online and I've not seen Ted again. I don't know if he's still creeping on people or if he's now officially a student or what. When I think of him, I'm still shaky. I hope I never run into him again.